Well, folks, Indiana's Republican establishment is pissed off in a state of shock and disappointment after their Senate primary for the Republican Party, especially in State Senate District 23, was overturned. And this recount that they had put Paula Copenhaver, who was endorsed by President Trump, ahead of the incumbent state senator Spencer Deery. Now, the driving point to this is that Deery was one of the Republicans who opposed President Trump's redistricting strategy. The funny part about this is that the original election was only decided by 3 votes. But this is just a small victory in a much bigger story, because this all goes back to the redistricting fight that President Trump has been waging across the country. I'm sure you remember it started in 2025. Trump was leading a statewide push to redraw congressional maps before the midterms. Texas, North Carolina, Florida, they all redrew their maps. Ohio did as well. And there's been some channels that have reported on this, and I just want to set something straight. Um, as it comes to this redraw effort, okay, the Supreme Court, they did not overturn the Civil Rights Act. What it did was it narrowed how Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act applied to race-conscious congressional districts. The court ruled that the Voting Rights Act did not require any state, including Louisiana, to create an additional majority black district. No DEI districts. Okay, that decision gave the states more room to challenge and reconsider their congressional maps. Okay, and a lot of them had been drawn primarily around race. And Indiana was one of the states. So President Trump wanted to bring this into his nationwide redistricting battle. And Indiana, now they currently have a 7 Republican to 2 Democrat congressional delegation. And this newly proposed map was intended to give them a 9-0 advantage. Okay. But the Indiana Senate, they rejected that plan by a vote to 31-19. Now, 21 Republican senators joined all 10 Democrats to defeat it. Think about that. Indiana is one of the most conservative states in the country. President Trump won the state by a massive margin, I think 26 points. And Republicans hold a supermajority in the legislature. But yet 21 Republicans took it upon themselves to vote with the Democrats and stop a congressional map designed to help Republicans protect the House of Representatives. Ultimately, they defied the president. They defied the strategy of the leader of the Republican Party, and they helped Democrats protect 2 congressional seats. And the president took that pretty personal. Him and his allies ended up pouring millions of dollars into these state Senate primaries. They deployed campaign organizations, conservative groups, outside resources, all to defeat the Republican senators who decided to oppose the maps and replace them with Republicans who understood what's at stake nationally. Now, of the 8 anti-redistricting incumbents who faced primaries, Trump personally endorsed challengers in 7 of the races. And one of those was State Senator Spencer Deery. Earlier this year, the president announced that it was his great honor to endorse Paula Copenhaver. He called her terrific, and he called Deery incompetent, an ineffective rhino who betrayed his voters. He also pointed out that he carried the district. I think it was 26 points. So why Spencer Deery thought it was a good idea to represent a district that Trump won by 26 points and then vote with Democrats against the president, against the America First agenda, is beyond me. President Trump's the leader of the party, dude. I mean, he's trying to help Republicans in Indiana protect the Republican majority in Congress. What did this guy think was going to happen? So on primary night, 5 of Trump's 7 endorsed candidates ended up defeating the anti-redistricting incumbents. Another anti-redistricting incumbent, Rick Niemeyer, lost to a challenger Trump didn't even endorse. That meant 6 of the 8 targeted incumbents were gone. Greg Good was one who survived his primary, and Spencer Deery He also appeared to survive by the skin of his teeth. After watching 6 of his anti-redistricting buddies lose, I think Deery thought this 3-vote margin, you know, put him in the clear. But he didn't realize that this wasn't over. Okay, the initially certified result had him winning 6,337 to 6,334. And because that margin was so close, Paula Copenhaver requested a recount. Now, the Indiana Recount Commission conducted a manual review across the 6 counties that make up the Senate District, number 23, and both candidates challenged a number of ballots, and the recount director's name was Evan Norris. He walked the commission through all of the disputes. Copenhaver's attorney argued that there were some absentee ballots that didn't contain the official signatures or seals and or election worker initials that are required under Indiana law. And that's an important disclosure. Okay. Deery's lawyer argued that because this was one of the, closest, or excuse me, her lawyer also argued that because this was one of the closest elections in Indiana history, that there was ultimately a very, very pointed responsibility to hold every ballot to the legal standard. And that's ultimately the commission's decision. And they ended up doing it. So they ended up invalidating 10 ballots, and 8 of those ballots belonged to Spencer Deery. 2 were for Paula. So the commission didn't find these 10 ballots to be fraudulent. They were rejected because they didn't meet the standard. They didn't have either a signature, a seal, or maybe an election worker didn't initial it. And Bill Bach, who is Paula's lawyer, made the argument that absentee ballots require those safeguards because they can be more vulnerable to fraud. So once these ballots were removed, well, guess what happened? Deery, winning by 3 votes, ended up changing. Who's now losing by 3 because Copenhagen now had 6,332 and he had 6,329. A net swing of 6 votes completely overturned an election that was decided by 3. So Deery watched the other anti-redistricting Republicans go down. He looked back at his 3-vote margin and thought he had somehow escaped President Trump. But he didn't. Now, the commission has declared Copenhaver the winner, but Deery's team is still announcing that they want to, put together a legal challenge. And a court could still change the outcome. But as it stands right now, Paula Copenhaver is ahead by 3 votes and holds the Republican nomination. Now, look, President Trump endorsed challengers against 7 of these anti-redistricting Republican incumbents. 5 won outright. Deery initially thought that he won, but not after the recount. So 6 of President Trump's 7 endorsed challengers are now on top. And in Rick Niermeyer's loss to, a challenger that Trump didn't even endorse, and 7 of the 8 anti-redistricting incumbents who faced primary challenges being out, we have a totally different Senate in Indiana. And this is where the one tiny state Senate race turns into a national story. Now remember, the Indiana Senate rejected the maps by 31-19. So if you do the math, if these 7 replacement candidates win their general election races, and if all 7 vote for a new congressional map, the 19 votes in favor would become 26. Those 31 votes would fail to 24. That's a majority. Okay. It doesn't mean Indiana automatically gets to a 9-0 map. It also doesn't mean the next vote is guaranteed. But it does mean, or it does not mean that Deery won't win some challenge. But what it means is that the Republican votes that stop President Trump's strategy to redistrict may not be there for the next time that this issue comes before the Indiana Senate. And Indiana could enter the next legislative session with a fundamentally different Republican caucus and a real opportunity to bring it back before the 2028 election. That could put 2 additional U.S. House seats in play. That is the bigger story. Okay, a state Senate and their primary could just, change the balance of power in Washington. Not because the establishment suddenly is losing the fight, not because Republicans are changing their minds on the midterms, but because Republicans voted for President Trump. President Trump backed challengers. And the politicians who defied the America First agenda and the president ultimately challenged the will of the people. And they had to face the consequences. Look, you don't get to campaign as a Republican, represent a district that the president carried by 26 points, vote with Democrats against the strategy that's being pursued by the dude who won, and then assume that the Republican label is going to protect you forever. Sometimes accountability comes in a landslide. Sometimes it comes in 3 votes. Either way, President Trump showed his value and his strength in Indiana. And thinks other states should take note. I think this is going to be the resounding theme as we get into the midterms. So let me know what you think. You think Indiana Republicans are going to bring back their redistricting efforts before the 2028 cycle? Drop your comments. Let me know. See you next time and hope you're having a great weekend.